Thank you, Jackson. Our final speaker for tonight is Elizabeth Herman. Elizabeth graduated from Tufts in 2010 and went on to pursue a Fulbright in Bangladesh. She is currently a freelance photographer and researcher in Brooklyn, New York. This talk embodies everything that TEX is all about.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming and for sticking around for the last conference. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Who here considers himself a critical thinker? Okay. Okay, then I better give a good talk. We've all been taught critical thought, the process of questioning our assumptions throughout our lives. It has been written as a standard in our curricula. It's been emphasized within the walls of this institution. It is a huge part of our education as liberal arts college students. We've developed through debate and through the intake of information and through practicing conversations with each other this skill set or toolbox of critical thought. And we use it when it's activated or triggered at certain times. And when is it activated? At what times are our processes of critical thought triggered? While this is by no means a comprehensive list, here are a few such examples. When we are confronted by multiple perspectives or by opinions that are not like our own. When we find ourselves in new places with practices or ideas that are different from what we're normally used to. Or when we see the once familiar in a new light. So let's break this down a little bit. It's basically whenever we find ourselves outside of our comfort zone. That is when these processes of critical thought are triggered. So to think of a few concrete examples, think back to your high school history textbook. Did it look a little bit like that? What you have is you have the main narrative. And then in order to emphasize critical thought, to get you as the reader to step outside and see the story from another point of view, you have an alternative perspective provided. So in this case, we have the story of the Civil War, and then the alternative perspective, the voice of an American Indian plopped down next to it. Or say when you're in a new place for the first time. My best friend in high school moved from California, from a conservative evangelical Christian community to Newton, a town in Massachusetts that's very liberal, very secular, and fairly Jewish. And for him, going to school every day was a trigger. Basically, mostly everything that he had held as accepted and true in his previous world was called into question all the time by those around him, every single day. Or seeing something familiar in a new light. Think back to the first time that you saw your grandparents as real people, instead of just those who brought you presents. That might have been when they first got into an argument with your parents, or when they scolded you for the first time, or maybe when they just said something that you disagreed with. Whatever it was, it made you question the way that you'd seen them previously. And that made you think about why you'd never questioned it before. These are all good things. We should think critically in each of these cases. We've been taught critical thought for a reason. It helps us clarify and gain more meaning in each of these situations. I'm not saying we shouldn't do this. What I am saying is that each of these triggers is external. It's outside of ourselves. And what we need to do is to think critically, more broadly, to figure out ways to think critically even when we are not outwardly triggered to do so. Because right now, in certain ways, critical thought is kind of like a special occasion, so to speak. We think critically when we're provoked. Instead, we need to find ways to think critically more broadly, even when it doesn't seem immediately necessary or obvious. So, taking another step back, let's ask why. Why are we even doing this in the first place? Why do we need to think critically? Say you open the paper one day and you see this photograph, accompanied by the caption, 20 terrorists executed after capture. The next day you open the paper again, and more good news, you see this photograph with humanitarian aid delivered to guerrilla fighters. In truth though, they're actually the same photograph, just cropped in slightly different ways. When you take a photo, you are choosing the elements that you want to be included and excluded from the frame, depending on what you want that photograph to say. But in truth, really, we do this all the time, everywhere. Whenever we tell a story, whenever we write our own or others' histories, or whenever we construct our Facebook timelines even. It is pervasive. You are choosing the events that you want in and out of the representation of your life. And this is exactly why we need to be more broadly critical. I'm not saying that you need to be more critical of your friends' Facebook timelines necessarily, but just that because of the way that our consciousness is being informed, now we're not just turning to a few select news sites anymore, but information is coming at us from everywhere all the time. And even if you don't hold the information that you get from social networking sites in the same regard as that you do from more reputable sources, it still informs the way that you see the world. I mean, how often can you actually recall where you heard a certain story or factoid? It all just blends together eventually, right? And that is exactly why we need to be more broadly critical, because every piece of information, every story or photograph or history is a constructed narrative, and therefore something that we need to be critically ingesting. But how do we do this? How do we become more broadly critical, even when we aren't outwardly provoked to be so? Last year I moved to Bangladesh, and this started a process that made me question everything that I saw as fundamental to myself and the way that I saw the world. I suddenly was hyper-aware of my role as a woman, of how I integrated into communities, of how the language that I spoke affected everything that I saw around me. Upon return, I experienced what many people would call reverse culture shock. But really, I soon realized that this was actually just my becoming aware of triggers where they had previously been invisible. All these things that I was now hypersensitized to were things that I should have always been critical of, but I hadn't ever seen why I needed to be before. They were within my comfort zone, within my realm of accepted knowledge. In going to Bangladesh, coming back, going to Bangladesh, gaining a new perspective, and then coming back, I was able to see everything in a new light, through a new lens. And this is exactly how we become more broadly critical. Not that all of you need to move to Bangladesh, or to Guatemala, or Egypt. I'm not saying that everybody in this room should move to a faraway place for a longish period of time. That's not what's important. What is important is that we recognize that we have these skills within us already. When I came back, the things around me were really much different, and in truth, neither was I. But my awareness of alternative perspectives, of these triggers, was. All we need to do is gain agency over these triggers, to recognize that these skills are within us. All we need to do is figure out how to activate them ourselves, to become aware of these alternative perspectives. To think of experience where you have had external triggers and apply that thought process more broadly. Think of the spaces in which you are not asking questions and why. Perhaps that's sitting around the dinner table with your family, or maybe that sitting in your favorite professor's class, or even in questioning your own personal beliefs and values. This can be as far-reaching as, why are you holding a grudge against your best friend? To, why do you support tax hikes for the wealthy? Whatever it is, it's about constantly asking questions. And this constant asking of questions, this activating, will activate triggers in our lives, even when there are no external forces doing so for us. This can be exhausting and confusing. Like putting on a new pair of glasses for the first time. It could be dizzying and disorienting and give you a massive headache. But eventually, in the end, once you adjust, I promise, everything will just seem clear.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to all the speakers. Thank you all for sticking around. So there we had it, 7 great speakers, 7 brilliant ideas. But this is not the end. Tonight's just the kickoff. Our videos will be posted online this weekend, and you can pick up the contact cards or business cards of the speakers outside when you leave. I would just now like to quickly thank the Institute of Global Leadership, the Office of Campus Life, Professor Deborah Cooney, Johnny and Luke for all their support during this event. I would now like to call upon the TEX speakers as well as the TEX team to come up in front, because they work together to provide you with this wonderful evening.
Beautiful, gorgeous host, Sanjana. And she loves TEX, and we can't imagine our meetings without her accent and us imitating her accent and her imitating ours. So we'll miss her, and we owe a lot to her.
Everyone can gather here.
Yeah.
TEX team. Anyways, thank you guys. Stay updated on our Facebook page, on our website, and shoot us an email if you want to get involved in this awesome idea exchange. Thank you all for coming out tonight.